So what are some short-term and long-term effects of the Japan disaster on the auto industry? Well, joining us now to go inside the research is Peter Ward, chair of the Department of Management Sciences at OSU's Fisher College of Business. He's also a professor of operations management. Peter, thanks for joining us. We do appreciate it.
My pleasure, Mike.
We should say our thoughts and prayers certainly go out to the Japanese people. The scope of this is unimaginable, and they are dealing with this tragedy on the human side. You have spent time over in Japan. You know Japanese people well, and especially the business people. They're very resilient, aren't they?
Incredibly resilient, and the way the Japanese people are handling this tragedy, I find inspiring.
On the business side of things, auto companies, Japan is known for that. How are they going to handle this? How are they handling it now?
Well, there are some part shortages that we're feeling already. The thing we have to remember is that certainly Honda and also Toyota manufacture the great bulk of their parts in the U.S., or their suppliers manufacture the great bulk of their parts in the U.S. So it's really very few parts that are affected. However, to make an automobile, we need 100% of the parts. Mm-hmm. So there's any shortage at all is really felt, and fairly quickly, because we don't have large inventories of these parts on hand. So therefore, we're already seeing shortages in the supply chain. Suppliers are being slowed down in the U.S., and we see cutbacks in work hours both in Honda and Toyota. And I might add that the Detroit 3 is also affected, because everybody gets parts from Japan. Small number of parts, but nonetheless, everybody imports.
On the subject of that so-called ripple effect, some have said that you might not see the full impact for about a month or so. Your contention is that we're already seeing.
Yeah,
that.
well, the month's up. We're seeing it.
Right.
Yeah, and it is. It varies from make to make, but there are significant delays certainly in getting parts. There are some parts that are what we call sole sourced to plants in Japan, and that's a real difficulty. So the automakers are scrambling to figure out ways to find substitutes that'll work fine.
Let's talk supply chain management.
Sure.
And correct me if I'm wrong. One of the reasons that a Honda or a Toyota can charge less for their cars if they don't have a lot of that inventory stacked up. Is that right?
Yeah.
Will that change because of this? Will people or companies rethink their supply chain management strategy?
Well, I think what we see is that generally, car makers make cars at about the pace that consumers buy cars, and that part suppliers are asked to produce parts at that same pace. So that's really what drives the production of parts and automobiles, and the notion of having big inventories really isn't very helpful. What we see is that usually when you stock inventories in great numbers, more than you need to just protect you from the next few days, you usually store the wrong stuff. So it's not all that helpful. So I think we're going to see that JIT that we hear so much about. I think we're going to see that's going to continue. Part makers, car makers, will certainly rethink their strategy, their global strategy for where supplies come from, with the idea of mitigating the risk of supply chain disruption. But they've been doing that already, and this is unpredictable. And who's to say that if they moved production somewhere else, we wouldn't have a similar disaster? I mean, this is not something that we could count. We would ever think would happen. This disaster that Japan has faced in multiple levels.
Certainly will be felt here in Ohio. We're known as an auto parts supply state.
Absolutely.
How might some smaller companies here in Ohio feel this?
Well, they'll be asked to slow down their production of parts. Because they won't be needed, because the auto producers are also slowing down. And again, this is not just Honda and Toyota. This is all of the automakers are slowing down in many makes. And so the implication is that suppliers will be laying off people or cutting short the shifts in coming months. And I expect this will probably last until July.
And we also get receive a lot of parts from Japan, not just in the auto industry, but electronics.
Yeah.
So we're getting things from them as well, and that'll have an effect, right?
Absolutely. So we know there are particularly key electronic components that come from Japan that go into almost every product we have today has some electronic component in it, and all of those are subject to be in one way or another slowed down or stopped for a period of time.
We mentioned how resilient the Japanese people can be as a people and as an economy and a business. Looking forward, short-term and long-term, we'll recover from this, right?
We will. I think that we'll have, again, there may be some rethinking in terms of supply chain. There may be, we don't want to have all of our, we don't want to source all of this product from that one plant in Japan. I mean, there are instances where there are certain parts where 60 or 70% of the world's supply, across all the automakers, for example, are coming from a single plant, and that's putting an awful lot of eggs in one basket. So I think we may see some rethinking there, but generally those supply chains aren't going to change, and where the economics really call for very few plants because of scale, that'll continue.
Peter Ward from Fisher College of Business. Peter, thank you very much. Great
My
information.
pleasure.